Welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today in our InfoSec seminar organized by the Information Systems Security and Assurance Management Department in Mahalshan School of Management. We begin our March InfoSec seminar by acknowledging that also this seminar is being held virtually. Concordia University of Edmonton is located on Treaty 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground and home for many indigenous peoples, including Cree, Salto, Blackfoot, Métis, and Nakota Sioux peoples. We respect and acknowledge this. We are pleased to welcome Dr. Sharif Al-Barrad, the Interim Dean of Management, who have joined us today for this great InfoSec seminar. In this seminar, we are pleased to have Jayton Hall to give us an interesting talk about an industry under attack, protecting the oil and the gas sector. Like over his 39-year career in security, Jayton has held senior positions within the Canadian government, including Chief Engineer for Telecommunication Security at the Department of National Defense, Director of Security at Global Affairs Canada, and Consul at the Canadian Embassy in Bureau, following the 1996-1997 shining path for terrorist crisis in Lima. In the private sector, he has served as CSO for renowned companies such as Bombardier Aerospace, Airbus Group in Paris, France, and Bell Canada, where he notably wrote the IT and telecommunication security plan for the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver. Since 2015, after leading the national cybersecurity practice for EI Canada, Jayton has worked as an independent consultant on multiple mandates and joined Fortinet as the Enterprise Chief Information Security Officer in 2024. Thanks, Jayton, for being with us today and sharing your experience with our audience. Just quick notes, during the presentation, microphones will be turned off to avoid interrupting the speaker. At the end, we will have 10 to 15 minutes for questions, and the microphones will be turned back on. Please limit yourself to one question to give opportunity to other participants to ask. If we have enough time, please feel free to re-ask again. And at the end, I will share the registration and feedback form with you. Please ensure to provide your name, email address, and brief feedback so we can send your certificate of attendance. Thank you. It's all yours, Jayton.
All right. Thank you very much for the introduction. All right. So let's get going. So as you may know, the oil and gas industry is subdivided into three main sectors of activities: upstream, midstream, and downstream. And each sector has their respective challenges. On the upstream side, they're in the exploration activities, and they do extraction as well. On the pipeline, they have many kilometers of unprotected pipeline networks to move oil and gas. They also transport CO2 for carbon capture. That's fairly new. And on the downstream side, they manage refineries and they do retail. So each one has their own security challenge. So with the oil and gas exploration and extraction, most of these sites are very remote. And in Calgary, they are exposed to forest fires, amongst others. Sometimes vandalism is another issue. When they do exploration, the data that they generate is highly confidential, as they contain information as to potential sources of oil in the future, and it may involve foreign actors that may want to interfere in all this or maybe acquire certain properties. Of course, like most people in the oil and gas sector, they're dealing with legacy OT systems and industrial control systems and SCADA vulnerabilities. These, unlike the IT environment, which the evergreen cycle is between 5 years, maximum 8. In the OT environment, it's not rare that we see old equipment that are at least 25 years old, so which creates a problem. So for the mainstream, just in the if we look at just the pipelines that cross a border, either a provincial border or a national border, we're looking at 73,000 kilometers of pipeline, most of them unprotected, subject to vandalism. So that's a big issue. There are several regulations going down to the states following the Colonial Pipeline breach a few years ago. TSA have issued new regulations for high-risk pipelines. So any Canadian pipeline operator that wants to export to the USA now has to deal with new security requirements. Because a lot of these pipelines are exposed, they're subject to sabotage by environmental activists mainly. And like the upstream people, they are dealing with legacy OT systems and old ICS and SCADA vulnerabilities. So downstream, very different problems. The refineries, it's a highly complex environment on the OT side. On the retail side, they sell to your average gas station. They sell jet fuel to the airports. They sell diesel to the train station, to the ships, etc. So each customer has different requirements. And they also, on the retail side, exposed to fraud and theft, which creates, again, the separate problems. So most of these people, these streams have one thing in common. They are trying to consolidate their IT and OT networks, primarily because now their OT systems, they're able to talk, understand the TCP/IP protocol. So it makes sense to try to centrally manage all this over a TCP/IP network. This allows to do a lot of remote work, and just so happens with the shortage of qualified manpower, this allows people to centrally manage the OT environment centrally. And so it saves money on one end, address the issue of manpower shortage, but it exposes security vulnerabilities when you connect your IT network to your OT network. If it's not done properly, then you become exposed. So one thing interesting to note, I don't know if you knew this, but the Colonial Pipeline breach, a lot of people think that it's the OT environment that was breached because they stop transporting oil and gas and so on, but it's the IT environment that was breached. And by precaution, they decided to shut down the OT network. Why? Because all they had between the IT network and OT network was a firewall, and they didn't think it provided the level of assurance needed to ensure that the malware, which was a ransomware, would not jump over the firewall and end up in the OT environment. So what I'm going to show you today is my secret sauce to provide a high assurance level to separate IT and OT while allowing the transfer of data from one side to the other. So on this slide here, what we have is the transfer of files from the IT network to the OT network. So it's not remote access. It's when you want to transfer a file, whether it's a security patch for servers and devices on the OT network, software updates for some of the OT systems, or Active Directory updates for those who have an Active Directory server on the OT network, and so on. So it's for file transfers, not remote access, strictly file transfer. The objective in here is to ensure that we don't end up transferring a malware file onto the OT system, okay, as we do all these updates. So how do you do it? So first of all, on the IT side, you have to identify which devices will be authorized to transfer these files. So maybe there'll only be 4 or 5 of them that will be authorized to do that. These devices must be hardened to make sure that only the required services are permitted to run. You have to put an enhanced and a endpoint detection and response solution on these devices, such that if they're impacted by a malware, it'll be detected. To be able to transfer a file, you need the people that log into that device, that computer, must have two-factor authentication plus, so MFA, multiple factor authentication. And why do I say plus? So it's a password, it's biometric, and also it's a digital certificate on these devices, such that only the computers that have been identified and authorized to transfer files can do it. So if you have your password and your biometric and you're using a different computer that is not authorized, it will not work. So essentially, it's like almost three-factor authentication. The only protocols the firewall that you see there, the only protocol that it will support is port 22, and it's for secure file transfer protocols, as I indicated, to transfer various files such as security patches, software updates, Active Directory updates, etc. Now, for those of you who have enough gray hair, like me, before we had email, like 30 years ago, exchange of files were done using a bulletin board system, a BBS. You can look it up on the internet. It's going to give you a description. You still can buy BBS software for free on the internet, or you can design your own. It's fairly simple. It's a file server, essentially, that allows you to allows the people on the IT side to upload files in particular folders, depending on the nature of the files that are being transferred. So the server, where the BBS application runs, once they receive a file, they will do a malware scanning. They will ensure that the files cannot be executed. So there'll be a sandbox in there. They'll look for, malware, and also they look for digital signature. So anybody on the IT network that has been authorized to upload a file on the BBS server will be required to digitally sign these files to guarantee their integrity. So when the BBS server receives these files, before saving them in the appropriate corresponding folder, they will validate the digital signature. So if it's for, let's say, you do a security patch, then the BBS will save the file in the security patch folder. If it's a Active Directory update, it will put the files on the Active Directory update. Why is it like that? Because on the OT network side, certain, like for example, the Active Directory server will probably do a lookup on the BBS to see if there's a new file in there that needs to be downloaded for update, but that particular process will not have access to the other files. If it's for a security patch, then whatever server you have or application on the OT network side that is responsible to manage security patches will have access to that folder, but nobody else. Okay, so a separate folder for each file type. And finally, in there, you want to be able to have a security information event management system that will monitor the network to look for any unusual activity. So this guarantees pretty much that malware cannot be transferred from the IT network to the other side. So should there be let's say a ransomware attack on the IT network side, we could easily turn off the firewall, and it would not affect the business on the OT network side. Okay. All right. So what if now you want to send data from the OT environment to the IT network? There are a lot of reasons for doing this. Billing or consumption data. For example, if you are on the downstream side of the oil and gas industry and you're selling oil or gas to consumers, you want to be paid for this based on the consumption and so on. So typically on the OT side, they will communicate the consumption, that they will send the consumption data to some sort of either ERP or financial system or billing system on the IT network side, such that the consumers can receive a bill. So the data needs to get out of the OT environment, go to the IT environment. Historian data, we see more and more historian data going into the cloud. It's unclassified, but it's a lot of data. Okay, so and when I say unclassified, I mean non-sensitive. So a lot of people want to do this in the cloud, but you want to ensure that whoever's in the cloud or whoever's on the IT network cannot get back in. Sometimes the data is sent to an ERP system to optimize the operations on the OT side. And also some people have their OT network managed by a third party to make sure that everything is going well, security or otherwise. So again, the flow of information only goes out. That means these third party, or this particular scenario, cannot go back there and change anything. They would have to phone the operations center for them to be notified that, hey, something's going on. So to do this, you put a secure data diode. This is a hardware-based device. It's hardened. It's doesn't need any software patches. It's very effective against advanced persistent threats. It's tamper resistant, and the flow of data physically can only go from the OT network to the OT network. So there's a diode, an LED in there where when data is received, it's sent over there, and there's a particular protocol that is used such that it's not like TCP/IP where you send a packet and you get a confirmation from the IT side. Yeah, I got it. No, you cannot send a confirmation packet back to the OT network. So there are some smarts in these boxes such that the data is sent with a very high level of confidence that has been received on the IT network side, and there's no need to confirm back that the packet has been received without any corruption. Okay. If you want to know more about this, feel free to read the various IEC standard 62443, for example. But typically, if you're not too sure which security data diode to buy one that is essentially used in a NERC SIP environment. So typically, power utilities will use these devices, and they're highly secure. All right. Also, especially for the upstream companies, those who do upstream work, they have to work. They have to have access to very remote sites when they need to change something or whatnot. And so this is typically done either by wireline, satellite, or cellular communications. So to do that, you need to have a modem. And a lot of modems that will claim they're very secure and everything, but what you want, again, is a modem that has been certified for a NERC environment. So these modems, they will provide multiple factor authentication. They're hardened. And typically what you want to have is your laptop configured with a Citrix connection such that your laptop is just an extension of a computer located in the OT environment, i.e., all you have is a screen, a keyboard, and a mouse. Okay, you cannot upload files through that connection. If you want to upload a file, you have to go back to the scenario that I've indicated to you initially, where you go through the BBS and so on. In here, typically, this is a remote operation. There's no file transfer authorized by the Citrix connection in there. Accordingly, the modem will only accept a very restricted number of protocols, and every transfer is monitored and logged. Great. So these are the three scenarios to be able to transfer data from one environment to the other. So you either use the BBS approach with DMZ for files going from the IT to the OT environment. If you want to send files from the OT environment to the IT environment, use a data diode. And if you want to do just a remote access to do troubleshooting or respond to a particular situation, then again, it's this one here. using a secure modem. All right. So technology is forcing, was giving the opportunity for companies to consolidate their IT/OT environment. And what I've found is that a lot of time, the governance behind it is lagging. So back in my younger days, IT and OT were totally separated. On the IT side, we had TCP/IP networks. On the OT side, it was serial communication with protocols such as Modbus or various others, that were serial communications. On the IT side, we had Microsoft, Apple, or Unix. On the OT world, it looks like every manufacturer had its own proprietary protocol, not necessarily compatible with other vendors. On the IT side, we're primarily concerned with confidentiality of the data, but on the OT world, it's more reliability and safety. And the people that work on the IT side, they're computer analysts. On the OT side, they're more electrical engineers. And to make matters worse, if you work for a power utility, for example, as an OT engineer, well, your skills are not worth much to go and work in the oil and gas industry because it's a very different environment. So it makes it very, very difficult, again, to have the expertise there. Then all of a sudden, about 15 years ago, we saw MPLS, fiber optic wide area networks, being used by both the IT and the OT world, primarily because they provide a very low latency, which is often critical for the OT world. And then it became too obvious that, okay, well, then let's connect our TCP/IP equipment to that. And then that allowed people to have a single solution for asset management, whether it's IT or OT. Then access controls could be done centrally. Malware protection could be done centrally, centralized monitoring, big data. And at the end of the day, we ended up with, the technology had sort of fused, essentially. And this was fueled, as indicated on the slide there, primarily by network technology convergence, primarily MPLS, TCP/IP networks. The need to centrally manage these things because of the lack of qualified resources available. They had no choice. And it also resulted in a reduction in operational cost. Okay. The problem is, a couple of years ago, I worked for did a small contract for an oil and gas company. And I was talking to the chief information security officer. I said, so who's responsible for OT security? Well, he said, I don't know, but it's not me. I said, really? So I said, how much do you want to bet that if there's a security breach in the OT environment, it's your phone that's going to ring? Why? Because people think you're responsible for OT security, even though if it's not officially established, you're the guy. And he said, well, I don't know nothing about OT. And when you talk with the OT people, see there's a volunteer in there that would want to deal with OT security. They'll say, well, we don't know nothing about OT security, about cybersecurity. So what happens is there's a disconnect and you end up with OT security becoming an orphan. So you have the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, who regularly is required on a quarterly basis to report risks to the senior executives. And that's part of the auditing process and compliance process. We don't have, in most companies, that same process for OT security. So at the senior executive level, they're just not sensitized to OT security risks. So if they're not aware that there are risks in their OT security environment, then there's no budget attached to it. There's no problem owner, and the risks just don't get addressed because nobody knows that they actually have risks in there. Okay, so it is often a problem. And what I have recommended to that particular CISO, I said, what you should do is hire an auditing firm to do a OT security audit, and they will produce a report that will likely show a lot of vulnerabilities, but you'll be able to use this report, present it to the senior executives, and use that as a business case for you to get the budget and resources you need to take care of OT security risks. He agreed to that, and that's exactly what he did. He ended up hiring me to write his OT security policies and directives, because this is what you end up having to do at the beginning, where if you have no expertise in OT security, then initially you hire consultants that will guide you and that will provide you advice such that you can learn from that consultant, and over time, then you become confident to run your own thing. All right, so that leaves the other questions. Okay, so how should I structure my organization to deal with this? Okay, so right now, this is an optimum scenario where the chief security officer reports the chief risk officer. So right now, I put senior vice president. It could be vice president as opposed to senior vice president, doesn't matter. All these functions that you see there are required. The rank is just a matter of what's the volume. Okay, so for example, the GRC, that's governance, risk, and compliance. So a SVP could have a vice president responsible for this. If the chief security officer is a vice president, then the person responsible for GRC would be a director. So typically, doesn't matter which industry, the person responsible for GRC is responsible to draft security policies and directives, conduct risk assessments / audits, doing pen testing and so on, and responsible to write the reports that will be sent to top executives. If we combine IT and OT, the drafting of the IT and OT security policies and directives is typically done in a working group. Regardless if you have OT or not, policies should not be drafted in isolation. You need to consult with the business because there are impacts on some of the policies that you produce. So you don't want to do this in isolation. So typically, policies and directives dealing with OT security, well, there will be OT engineers around the table. These people would learn from the cybersecurity people around the table, and at the end of the day, you produce policies and directives that do the job. In my particular case, so I was a consultant, and I would recommend, if you don't have these things in place, you hire a consultant to help you animate these working groups, these workshops, to draft the security policies and directives. So when you do risk assessments, typically when you do audits, when you do pen testing, then the scope gets wider. You don't just focus on IT, you also include OT security. Now, as you may or may not know, doing a pen testing on an OT environment requires very careful considerations. You do not want to send just any Tom, Dick, and Harry pen tester doing these types of tests, because they could bring down your OT environment. So again, this is a highly specialized job, and you want to bring in people who know how to do it. And so finally, the third bullet on the GRC is security compliance and reporting. So the reports that are sent to the executive committee or the board will have to be widened and include risk related to OT security, whether it's the absence of patching, whether you don't have the proper level of assurance to transfer file from one environment to the other, or whether it's a remote access, doesn't matter. You have to have a dashboard for people to have an idea at the executive level, what are the issues. So on the right-hand side, program management. So you want to be able to sort of look ahead, as opposed to one of the problems that heads of security have is that they're just doing the fighting every day, and they just don't have time to sit down and look at where they're going, what's going on. Their companies are doing mergers and acquisitions a lot of times the chief security officer is not aware, and he learns it in the news just like everybody else, and there are all kinds of security issues that need to be dealt with. So the chief security officer needs to be able to have visibility on what the company is doing, which is why optimally, the chief security officer should report to the chief risk officer. Chief risk officers are always involved in mergers and acquisitions. It's always very, very sort of a confidential and hush-hush discussion. And I believe the CSO should be brought in these discussions. Otherwise, it could delay the integration of the systems. So strategic planning, typically when you do, for example, an audit and you uncover all kinds of vulnerabilities and security problems, then you need to have a plan as to how this is going to get fixed. Most of the time, and there are complex issues that don't get fixed overnight. You need to have a roadmap, typically 2 to 3 years, to fix things, to go get the budget and resources to fix things. Security awareness is a big issue. Security awareness would now have to be expanded to include OT security. And this security awareness is key to defend against ransomware attacks, for example. Third-party relations, a lot of companies have to outsource some of their security functions. And as you may know, you can outsource security functions, but you cannot outsource accountability. So that being said, you need to be able to monitor how well or how bad your contractors are working for you. If they're providing online services for you, then they should be, certified SOC 2 Type 2. I don't know if you're familiar with that standard, but you don't just give contracts to any Tom, Dick, and Harry. You want to give online contracts to people who have met certain security compliance requirement for their online services. At the bottom, IT/OT security advisory. So every time companies have projects, whether it's an IT project or an OT project to do whatever, and outside of the chief security officer's team, you'll find out very quickly that the people don't have much expertise in cybersecurity. So you need to be involved at the very early stage of the project to identify what the security requirements will be. And then it gets developed, gets designed, and then the security team will validate that the security controls have been implemented before it's put into operation. So this team would have to be multidisciplinary. You would have primarily cybersecurity people, but you'd want to have 1 or 2 OT engineers in there that will look at various security requirements for the OT side. And typically, at the beginning, you'll see that the OT engineers do not know much about cyber, and the cybersecurity people do not know much about OT. But by working together, they will learn from one another. And you'll see within a couple of years, both sides will become very proficient, both in IT and OT security. So here I talk about finding a fusion center. When you have IT security on one side and physical security on the other side and OT security somewhere else, you're just totally unable to efficiently respond to a security incident. So the optimal organization is you have your IT security in there and physical security monitoring in there. You typically do not put OT security in that fusion center. Why? Because of all these security mechanisms that we have put to restrict the transfer of data from the IT to the OT environment. So what you would typically do, each critical infrastructure has an operations center where they manage their OT environment. And typically it's managed there 24/7. This is where you would put an IT/OT security analyst with the operations center. That's in red on the right-hand side of my slide. And so that IT security analyst would typically report to the chief security officer, but would be physically working at the operations center. That person would know how to deal with various logs and and would look at the maybe some of the alerts being generated by the security information event management system, and would meet on a regular basis with people at the fusion center. So the fusion center would typically, you would put together physical security monitoring and IT security monitoring. You may, in that same team, add identity and access management. So in identity and access management, when you have a integrated security function under a chief security officer, that includes logical and physical access. Okay, right now, as you may know, OT security highly depends on physical security at various remote sites. The problem that we have is a lot of turnover of people. So people make duplicates of keys to enter into facilities. The person retires or leaves. The person leaves with the keys, or sometimes the person would have made a copy of the key for whatever reason, and then we lose control very quickly. So we need to have an overall visibility on physical security risks related to identity and access management, such that when an employee leaves, both the physical and logical access are suspended. On the physical security team at the bottom right of the org chart, and these are your experts that will tell you all the physical security requirement when you want to build a new building, when you do modifications to a building. They'll tell you about the types of locks you need there, how to integrate the badge reader with the central system, the security cameras, where is the data going to be stored, how long is it going to be stored, key management requirements, so etc. So these guys will ensure that the contracts that are given to various builders include all the required physical security requirements. So that's it for me. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Jayden, for this interesting presentation. I will open the mics now. So the microphones are turned back on. So do we have any question? Do we have any questions? Yes, please go ahead.
Good day. Apart from the hardening mechanism you spoke about, where you put the demilitarized zone and put the BBS server for file forwarding for the updating of packages, are there any other security hardening measures you know about for OT security?
Well, the data diode, it comes off the shelf. Like for example, there's the most well-known one is from a company called Waterfall, and it supports various protocols. You just select the protocols that you want to have, and you install it there, and then it works. It's fairly straightforward. The one with the BBS requires a bit more customization. You can build your own BBS, or some companies will sell you something similar to that, but lacks, for example, the digital signature validation, for example, will lack the sandboxing and so on. So the approach that I provided, you could easily give a contract to a system developer to give you a hardened BBS, and then you can add the various functionalities that I've suggested in there to make it secure.
Thank you.
Great. NG, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. At least an eye-opener in terms of what happened in the OT world. And one of the things you mentioned in terms of risk was the legacy OT system. I know we struggle in the IT world with legacy application because, the way it was designed, it doesn't meet the current security requirements of this new era. what do you think companies are doing to manage vulnerability associated with legacy OT system today?
Okay, so what is used often is called network segmentation or micro segmentation. So if you cannot, if the legacy system cannot be secured because it's 30 years old and you cannot update the password or this or that, then typically you build a fence around it through micro segmentation. So you secure it at the network level as opposed to securing it at the application or device level.
Thank you.
Great. Any more questions? Yes, Jacob, please go ahead.
Again, thank you, sir, for the presentation. Kind of to piggyback off one of the previous questions asked about different types of security hardening, is there what you call a best method of the ones that you explain, or is it kind of just a case-by-case basis depending on who you contract out to?
No, so what I proposed in there is not unique to the oil and gas industry. As a matter of fact, I designed that approach when I was under contract for a large U.S. Power utility company that wanted a highly with a high level of assurance that the files going into their OT environment would not contain malware and so on. So it's very generic.
Understood. Thank you.
But it's not. You cannot buy it off the shelf right now. There are companies that will provide something close to it. But as I said, it lacks certain of the features that I've suggested, like the digital signature validation, the sandboxing, and so on.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Great. Any more questions? Any more questions? So, please ensure you provide your name, email address, and the brief feedback so we can send you your certificate of attendance. I shared the link with you in the chatting area. So any more questions before we wrap up?
Feel free to reach out to me. I don't know if you have my email address or whatever, but feel free to reach out to me or connect with me on LinkedIn. It'll be a pleasure to connect with you guys.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Jatin Hall for sharing his expertise with us today. Your insights and experience have given us a lot to think about, and we truly appreciate you taking the time to speak with our community. I'm also excited to announce our next seminar, which will take place on Wednesday, April 16 at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. We have a fantastic session lined up featuring two distinguished Q alumni, Lisa Yearwood and Sami Shahiri. So we look forward to see you next time. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
My pleasure. Take care.
Thanks very much, Gideon.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.